Hello, hello, hello! Greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of greeting across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back, my dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, to the. Wait, what's that? Oh, never mind. Study! Oh, Dr. Zanium, of course he did. Hello there, everyone. Hello there, Sophia Ignace. Welcome. Congratulations on getting first. Yes, you got it. Hello there, Dr. Zadium. Welcome. Hello there, FT Wastes. You were so close. Oh. Hello there, Julian20. Welcome. Didn't try it this time. Wow, that's unusual. Hello there, Lady Yumi. Welcome. You didn't know that there was that. Oh. Well, you can. Yeah, maybe next time, Lady Yumi. Oh, I'm more interested in hydrate. Of course you are. Why am I not surprised? And hello there, Dr. Zadium. And of course, you asked for a redeem of the radio voice. Give me a second. I have to always hydrate before I do radio voice. Uh, Hello there, greetings, welcome, and welcome once again, my dear listeners, to Radio Matsu, where we entertain you all night long. Tonight, we're taking you out of this world with some classic science fiction stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself here at Radio Matsu. I'll see you there. I hope that was to your liking, Dr. Zadium. Dr. Zadium, hey, it's not my fault you have a smooth radio voice. If you waste I don't know. Oh my goodness. That always kind of embarrasses me because, I'm not I mean I enjoy doing the voice, but it's not something I actually plan to. Dr. Zadium, it was indeed superb. Of course. Of course it was. Ugh. So my dear scholars, how are you all doing? Are you doing well? I hope you're doing well. I, for myself, are Lady Yui. Damn, he's a smooth operator. You're gonna make me blush. Julian20, okays. You're doing okays. Well, that counts. Dr. Zadium, doing great. Wonderful. Wonderful. I, for myself, am a mix of really excited, really happy, and really, 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 really stressed out. As some of you might be aware, I am going to be taking a journey for a few days, and I will not be here. Um, but I wanted to do a final stream before I actually left because you scholars are of course very, very, very special to me, and I'm always happy to have you around. So I wanted to give you something before I went. To waste. Just got done Ubering. I'm tired and hungry, but I'm fixing that now. Oh, good, good, good. That's excellent, wastes. That's what you should be doing. Ah, but anyway, for tonight's stream, we are skipping our gaming stream this week because I thought it might be fun to do a reading stream as voted by you, my dear scholars. We will be doing a short story stream of science fiction tales. And these are picked by me. Some of the stories I do know, some of them are new. But they are all from some of my favorite science fiction authors. And you might be expecting me to choose some Isaac Asimov, some Arthur C. Clarke, those sorts. But no, no, no. I've chosen authors who, you might have heard of them, but they don't get a lot of notice. So I've chosen some like Fritz Leiber and I probably butchered that name, Robert Sheckley, who is my all-time favorite science fiction author. He is fantastic. Um, some Frederick Brown, and a bonus one of an author who I am not aware of, but I have heard the story involved, and it was fantastic. So I thought, I don't know how many stories I'm going to get to read tonight. Some of them are quite long, so this stream might go on for a while. I might strain my voice, in fact. But I wanted to do something extra special for you all. Oh my goodness. But yes, yes. I assume do are any of you in dear scholars in my chat now? Are any of you science fiction fans? I am curious. FT Waste, and we deeply appreciate you. Ah, thank you, Waste. FT Waste, sci-fi fan here. Julian20, yes. Dr. Zadium, yep. Lady Yumi, me. I, I'm not surprised. I mean, most people are like science fiction in some fashion. So you might be wondering how I'm able to read these stories because many of these stories are actually from the 1950s on, 1940s, 1950s. So I'm going to do a little bit of a digression before I start. The reason I'm able to read these stories is because these were published before the copyright law changed. And at that time, when they were being written, when they were written, it was you had to renew the copyright yearly, I believe. Private Maverick, ready for some sci-fi stories? Hello there, Private Maverick. Welcome. Good to hear that. I'm really excited. Um, but at some point, each of these stories, the original copyright holder failed to renew the copyright. So because of that, these stories are in the public domain. I checked as much as I could for that. So even though they're later than the usual public domain line, they do count as public domain. FTOAs, they slip through their fingers. Yes, exactly. They basically went unnoticed, and some authors do that. They just don't bother to remember to renew their copyright or something of that nature. And sometimes, and at the time, I believe the laws don't retroactively renew the copyright either. So once they're in the public domain, they can't be put back into copyright. I think. But anyway, my dear scholars, shall we begin our journey into the world of science fiction? Ooh, I'm never going to do that again. Lady Yumi, their loss, our gain. Ugh, I really should not do that. So then, my dear scholars, FTO is boldly going where no one has gone before. Oh, yes, 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 of course. FTO, yes, sure, why not? Julian20, yes, please. You are so polite, Julian20. All right then. So sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking, and let us begin our journey into the world of science fiction. Ooh, I just said I was going to do it, but I ended up doing it. Using tonight's first tale comes from the writings of Fritz Lieber, and it is entitled "A Pail of Air." And there's a little bit of a note here from the original publication, which was in Galaxy Science Fiction magazine. The dark star passed, bringing with it eternal night and turning history into incredible myth in a single generation. Pa had sent me out to get an extra pail of air. I just about scooped it full and most of the warmth had leaked from my fingers when I saw the thing. At first I thought it was a young lady. Yes, a beautiful young lady's face, all glowing in the dark and looking at me from the fifth floor of the opposite apartment, which hereabouts is the floor just above the white blanket of frozen air. I'd never seen a live young lady before, except in the old magazines. Sis is just a kid, and Ma is pretty sick and miserable. And it gave me such a start that I dropped the pail. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? Knowing everyone on Earth was dead, except Pa and Ma and Sis and you. Even at that, I don't suppose I should have been surprised. We all see things now and then. Ma has some pretty bad ones, to judge from the way she bugs her eyes at nothing and just screams and huddles back against the blankets hanging around the nest. Pa says it is natural we should react like that sometimes. When I'd recovered the pail and could look again at the opposite apartment, I got an idea of what Mom might be feeling at those times, for I saw it wasn't a young lady at all, but simply a light. A tiny light that moved stealthily from window to window, just as if one of the cruel little stars had come down out of the airless sky to investigate why the earth had gone away from the sun, and maybe to hunt down something to torment or terrify, now that the earth didn't have the sun's protection. I tell you, the thought of it gave me the creeps. I just stood there, shaking and almost froze my feet, and did frost my helmet so solid on the inside that I couldn't have seen the light, even if it had come out of one of the windows to get me. Then I had the wit to go back inside. Pretty soon I was feeling my familiar way through the 30 or so blankets and rugs Pa has got hung around to slow down the escape of air from the nest, and I wasn't quite so scared. I began to hear the ticking of the clocks in the nest and knew I was getting back into air, because there's no sound outside in the vacuum, of course. But my mind was still crawly and uneasy as I pushed through the last blankets. Pa's got them faced with aluminum foil to hold in the heat, and came into the nest. Let me tell you about the nest. It's low and snug, just room for the four of us and our things. The floor is covered with thick woolly rugs. 3 of the sides are blankets, and the blankets roofing it touch Pa's head. He tells me it's inside a much bigger room, but I've never seen the real walls or ceiling. Against one of the blanket walls is a big set of shelves, with tools and books and other stuff, and on top of it a whole row of clocks. Pa's very fussy about keeping them wound. He says we must never forget time, and without a sun or moon, that would be easy to do. The fourth wall has blankets all over, except around the fireplace, in which there is a fire that must never go out. It keeps us from freezing, and does a lot more besides. One of us must always watch it. Some of the clocks are alarm, and we can use them to remind us. In the early days, there was only Ma to take turns with Pa. I think of that when she gets difficult. But now there's me to help, and Sis too. It's Pa who is the chief guardian of the fire, though. I always think of him that way. A tall man sitting cross-legged, frowning anxiously at the fire, his lined face golden in its light, and every so often carefully placing on it a piece of coal from the big heap beside it. Pa tells me there used to be guardians of the fire sometimes in the very old days. Vestal Virgins, he calls them, although there was unfrozen air all around then, and you didn't really need one. Excuse me. He was sitting just that way now, though he got up quick to take the pail from me and bawl me out for loitering. He spotted my frozen helmet right off. That roused Ma and she joined in picking on me. She's always trying to get the load off her feelings, Pa explains. He shut her up pretty fast. Sis let off a couple of silly squeals, too. Pa handled the pail of air in a twist of cloth. Now that it was inside the nest, you could really feel the coldness, its coldness. It just seemed to suck the heat out of everything. Even the flames cringed away from it as Pa put it down close by the fire. Yet it's that glimmery white stuff in the pail that keeps us alive. It slowly melts and vanishes and refreshes the nest and feeds the fire. The blankets keep it from escaping too fast. Pa'd like to seal the whole place, but he can't. Building's too earthquake twisted, and besides, he has to leave the chimney open for smoke. Pa says air is tiny molecules that fly away like a flash if there isn't something to stop them. We have to watch sharp not to let the air run low. Pa always keeps a big reserve supply of it in buckets behind the first blankets, along with extra coal and cans of food and other things, such as pails of snow to melt for water. We have to go way down to the bottom floor for that stuff, which is a mean trip, and get it through a door to outside. You see, when the earth got cold, all the water in the air froze first and made a blanket 10 feet thick or so everywhere, and then down on top of that dropped the crystals of frozen air, making another white blanket 60 or 70 feet thick maybe. Of course, all the parts of the air didn't freeze and snow down at the same time. First to drop out was the carbon dioxide. When you're shoveling for water, you have to make sure you don't go too high and get any of that stuff mixed in, for it would put you to sleep, maybe for good, and make the fire go out. Next, there's the nitrogen, which doesn't count one way or the other, though it's the biggest part of the blanket. On top of that, and easy to get at, which is lucky for us, there's the oxygen that keeps us alive. Pa says we live better than kings ever did, breathing pure oxygen. Actually, that would be a terrible thing for you to do, by the way, my dear scholars. Breathing pure oxygen would probably kill you. But we're used to it and don't notice. Finally, at the very top, there's a slick of liquid helium, which is funny stuff. All these gases in neat separate layers, like a pussy caffy. Don't know what that is. Pa laughingly says, whatever that is. FTWA's pure oxygen is poisonous. Yes, it is. They actually should be dead if they're breathing pure oxygen. I was busting to tell them all about what I'd seen, and so as soon as I ducked out of my helmet, and while I was still climbing out of my suit, I cut loose. Right away, Ma got nervous and began making eyes at the entry slit in the blankets and wringing her hands together. The hand where she'd lost 3 fingers from frostbite inside the good one, as usual. I could tell that Pa was annoyed at me scaring her and wanted to explain it all away quickly. Yet could see I wasn't fooling. "And you watched this lot for some time, son?" he asked when I finished. I hadn't said anything about first thinking it was a young lady's face. Somehow that part embarrassed me. "Long enough for it to pass 5 windows and go to the next floor." "And it didn't look like stray electricity, or crawling liquid, or starlight focused by a growing crystal, or anything like that." Like that? He wasn't just making up those ideas. Odd things happen in a world that's about as cold as can be, and just when you think matter would be frozen dead, it takes on strange new life. A slimy stuff comes crawling toward the nest, just like an animal snuffing for heat. That's the liquid helium. And once, when I was little, a bolt of lightning, not even Pa could figure where it came from, hit the nearby steeple and crawled up and down it for weeks, until the glow finally died. "Not like anything I ever saw," I told him. He stood for a moment frowning. Then, "I'll go out with you, and you show it to me," he said. Ma raised a howl at the idea of being left alone, and Sis joined in too, but Pa quieted them. We started climbing into our outside clothes. Mine had been warmed by the fire. Pa made them. They have plastic headpieces that were once big double-duty transparent food cans, but they keep heat and air in, and can replace the air for a little while, long enough for our trips for water and coal and food and so on. Ma started moaning again. I've always known there was something outside there, waiting to get us. I've felt it for years. Something that's part of the cold and hates all warmth and wants to destroy the nest. It's been watching us all this time, and now it's coming after us. It'll get you, and then come for me. Don't go, Harry. Hello there, whoever you are. Knights? I guess it's night where you are. Hmm, interesting. Apu. I cannot pronounce that. I don't want to butcher the words. But hello there. We are in the middle of reading A Pail of Air by Fritz Leiber. Pa had everything on but his helmet. He knelt by the fireplace and reached in and shook the long metal rod that goes up the chimney and knocks off the ice that keeps trying to clog it. Once a week he goes up on the roof to check if it's working all right. That's our worst trip, and Pa won't let me make it alone. Sis, Pa said quietly, come watch the fire. Keep an eye on the air, too. If it gets low or doesn't seem to be boiling fast enough, fetch another bucket from behind the blanket. But mind your hands. Use the cloth to pick up the bucket. Excuse me. Sis quit helping Ma be frightened and came over and did as she was told. Ma quieted down pretty suddenly, though her eyes were still kind of wild as she watched Pa fix on his helmet tight and pick up a pail, and the two of us go out. Pa led the way, and I took hold of his belt. It's a funny thing, I'm not afraid to go by myself, but when Pa's along, I always want to hold on to him. Habit, I guess. And then there's no denying that this time I was a bit scared. I'm trying to read that word again. So that's stadia? Well, greetings to you, asexual. Welcome to the study. Glad to have you here. It's a funny thing, I'm not afraid to go by myself, but when Pa's along, I always want to hold on to him. Habit, I guess. And then there's no denying that this time I was a bit scared. You see, it's this way. We know that everything is dead out there. Pa heard the last radio voices fade away years ago, and had seen some of the last folks die who weren't as lucky or well protected as us. FT Waste. Oh, that's meant to be an emote. Oh, that explains it then. Oh. Oh, okay. So we knew that if there was something groping around out there, it couldn't be anything human or friendly. Besides that, there's a feeling that comes with it always being night. Cold night. Pa says there used to be some of that feeling even in the old days, but then every morning the sun would come and chase it away. I have to take his word for that, not ever remembering the sun as being anything more than a big star. You see, I hadn't been born when the dark star snatched us away from the sun, and by now it's dragged us out beyond the orbit of the planet Pluto, Pa says, and taking us further out all the time. I found myself wondering whether there might have been something on the dark star that wanted us, and if that was why it had captured the Earth. Just then we came to the end of the corridor, and I followed Pa out on the balcony. I don't know what the city looked like in the old days, but now it's beautiful. The starlight lets you see it pretty well. There's quite a bit of light in those steady points speckling the blackness above. Pa says the stars used to twinkle once, but that was because there was air. We're on a hill, and the shimmery plain drops away from us, and then flattens out, cut up into neat squares by the troughs that used to be streets. I sometimes make my mashed potatoes look like it before I pour on the gravy. Some taller buildings push up out of the feathery plain, topped by rounded caps of air crystals like the fur hood Ma wears, only wider. On those buildings you can see the darker squares of windows underlined by white dashes of air crystals. Some of them are on a slant, for many of the buildings are pretty badly twisted by the quakes, and all the rest that happened when the dark star captured the earth. Lady Me, the way the world is explained sounds like the Dark Ages almost. Oh, yes. Yes. Although Dark Ages is an archaic word, but yes, quite. Here and there a few icicles hang. Water icicles from the first days of the cold. Other icicles of frozen air that melted on the roofs and dripped and froze again. Sometimes one of those icicles will catch the light of a star and send it to you so brightly you think the star has swooped into the city. That was one of the things Pa had been thinking of when I told him about the light. But I had thought of it myself first and known it wasn't so. Excuse me. He touched his helmet to mine so we could talk easier, and he asked me to point out the windows to him. But there wasn't any light moving around inside them now or anywhere else. To my surprise, Pa didn't bawl me out and tell me I'd been seeing things. He looked all around quite a while after filling his pail, and just as we were going inside, he whipped around without warning, as if to take some peeping thing off guard. I could feel it too. Oh, thank you for the hydrate, Lady Yumi. I did need some water for that. I could feel it too. The old peace was gone. There was something lurking out there, watching, waiting, getting ready. Inside, he said to me, touching helmets, "If you see something like that again, son, don't tell the others. Your ma's sort of nervous these days, and we owe her all the feeling of safety we can give her. Once, it was when your sister was born, I was ready to give up and die, but your mother kept me trying. Another time she kept the fire going a whole week all by herself when I was sick. Nursed me and took care of the two of you, too. You know that game we sometimes play, sitting in a square in the nest, tossing a ball around? Courage is like a ball, son. A person can hold it only so long, and then he's got to toss it to someone else. When it's tossed your way, you've got to catch it and hold it tight, and hope there'll be someone else to toss it to you to when you get tired of being brave." His talking to me that way made me feel grown up and good, but it didn't wipe away the thing outside from the back of my mind, or the fact that Pa took it seriously. It's hard to hide your feelings about such a thing. When we got back in the nest and took off our outside clothes, Pa laughed about it all and told them it was nothing and kidded me for having such an imagination, but his words fell flat. He didn't convince Ma and Sis any more than he did me. It looked for a minute like we were all fumbling the courage ball. Something had to be done, and almost before I knew what I was going to say, I heard myself asking Pa to tell us about the old days and how it all happened. Oh, one Jewel, that I haven't had a redeem like that for a while. Let me see. 1 second. And out of context. No. Give me 1 second, one Truel. I will be right back while I get a book. All right then. So, an out of context reading for One True L. The reporters wrote Pierre's wife gives evidence in air death mystery. Some of them put in snake poison mystery. That is your out of context reading, One True L. Also, welcome. We are in the middle of reading A Pail of Air by Fritz Leiber. Snake poison, yes. Oh, it's an old science fiction story, One True L. He sometimes doesn't mind telling that story, and Sis and I sure like to listen to it. And he got my idea. So we were all settled around the fire in a wink, and Ma pushed up some cans to thaw for supper, and Pa began. Before he did, though, I noticed him casually get a hammer from the shelf and lay it down beside him. It was the same old story as always. I think I could recite the main thread of it in my sleep, though Pa always puts in a new detail or two and keeps improving it in spots. He told us how the earth had been swinging around the sun ever so steady and warm, the people on it fixing to make money in wars and have a good time and get power and treat each other right or wrong. Without warning, there comes charging out of space this dead star, this burned out sun, and upsets everything. You know, I find it hard to believe in the way those people felt, any more than I can believe in the swarming number of them. Imagine people getting ready for the horrible sort of war they were cooking up, wanting it even, or at least wishing it were over so as to end their nervousness. As if all folks didn't have to hang together and pool every bit of warmth just to keep alive. And how can they have hope to end danger any more than we can hope to end the cold? Sometimes I think Pa exaggerates and makes things out too black. He's crossed with us once in a while and was probably cross with all those folks. Still, some of the things I read in the old magazines sound pretty wild. He may be right. The dark star, as Pa went on telling it, rushed in pretty fast, and there wasn't much time to get ready. At the beginning, they tried to keep it a secret from most people, but then the truth came out. What with the earthquakes and floods, imagine oceans of unfrozen water, and people seeing stars blotted out by something on a clear night. First off, they thought it would hit the sun, and then they thought it would hit the earth. There was even the start of a rush to get to a place called China because people thought the star would hit on the other side. But then they found it wasn't going to hit either side, but was going to come very close to the earth. Excuse me. Most of the other planets were on the other side of the sun and didn't get involved. The sun and the newcomer fought over the earth for a little while, pulling it this way and that like two dogs growling over a bone, Pa described it this time, and then the newcomer won and carried us off. The sun got a consolation prize, though. At the last minute, he managed to hold on to the moon. This was the time of the monster earthquakes and floods, 20 times worse than anything before. It was also the time of the big jerk, as Pa calls it, when all Earth got yanked suddenly, just as Pa has done to me once or twice, grabbing me by the collar to do it, when I've been sitting too far from the fire. You see, the dark star was going through space faster than the sun and in the opposite direction, and it had to wrench the world considerably in order to take it away. The big jerk didn't last long. It was over as soon as the Earth was settled down in its new orbit around the dark star. But it was pretty terrible while it lasted. Pa says that all sorts of cliffs and buildings toppled. Oh, have a good time at your dance, Julian 20. And thank you for coming. Pa says that all sorts of cliffs and buildings toppled, oceans slopped over, swamps and sandy deserts gave great sliding surges that buried nearby lands. Earth was almost jerked out of its atmosphere blanket, and the air got so thin in spots that people keeled over and fainted. Though, of course, at the same time, they were getting knocked down by the big jerk, and maybe their bones broke or skulls cracked. We've often asked Pa how people acted during this time, whether they were scared or brave or crazy or stunned or all four, but he's sort of leery of the subject, and he was again tonight. He said he was mostly too busy to notice. You see, Pa and some scientist friends of his had figured out part of what was going to happen. They'd known we'd get captured and our air would freeze, and they'd been working like mad to fix up a place with airtight walls and doors and insulation against the cold, and big supplies of food and fuel and water and bottled air. But the place got smashed in the last earthquakes, and all Pa's friends were killed then and in the big jerk. So he had to start over and throw the nest together quick, without any advantages, just using any stuff he could lay his hands on. Excuse me. I guess he's telling pretty much the truth when he says he didn't have any time to keep an eye on how other folks behaved, either then or in the big freeze that followed. Followed very quick, you know, both because the dark star was pulling us away very fast and because Earth's rotation had been slowed in the tug of war, so that the nights were 10 old nights long. Still, I've got an idea of some of the things that happened from the frozen folk I've seen. A few of them in other rooms in our building, others clustered around the furnaces in the basement where we go for coal. Oh, hello there, Cool Skeleton. Welcome. You're not late. We are still on the first story of the evening. A Pail of Air by Fritz Leiber. In one of the rooms, an old man sits stiff in a chair, with an arm and a leg in splints. In another, a man and woman are huddled together in a bed with heaps of covers over them. You can just see their heads peeking out close together. And in another, a beautiful young lady is sitting with a pile of wraps huddled around her, looking hopefully toward the door as if waiting for someone who never came back with warmth and food. They're all still and stiff as statues, of course, but just like life. Pa showed them to me once in quick winks of his flashlight when he still had a fair supply of batteries and could afford to waste a little light. They scared me pretty bad and made my heart pound, especially the young lady. Another little drink. Now, with Pa telling his story for the upteenth time to take our minds off another scare, I got to thinking of the frozen folk again. All of a sudden, I got an idea that scared me worse than anything yet. Cool Skeleton, I've been finishing some editing up and prepping for my next stream. Oh, wonderful! Oh, how exciting! That's great, Cool Skeleton. Glad to hear you doing that. You see, I just remembered the face I thought I'd seen in the window. I'd forgotten about that on account of trying to hide it from the others. What, I asked myself, if the frozen folk were coming to life? What if they were like the liquid helium that got a new lease on life and started crawling toward the heat just when you thought its molecules ought to freeze solid forever? Or like the electricity that moves endlessly when it's just about as cold as that? What if the ever-growing cold, with the temperature creeping down the last few degrees to the last zero, had mysteriously wakened the frozen folk to life? Not warm-blooded life, but something icy and horrible. Music. That was a worse idea than the one about something coming down from the dark star to get us. Or maybe, I thought, both ideas might be true. Something coming down from the dark star and making the frozen folk move, using them to do its work. That would fit with both things I'd seen. The beautiful young lady and the moving star-like light. The frozen folk with minds from the dark star behind their unwinking eyes, creeping, crawling, snuffing their way following the heat to the nest. I tell you, that thought gave me a very bad turn, and I wanted very badly to tell the others my fears. But I remember what Pa had said and clenched my teeth and didn't speak. We were sitting very still. Even the fire was burning silently. There was just the sound of Pa's voice and the clocks. And then, from beyond the blankets, I thought I heard a tiny noise. My skin tightened all over me. Pa was telling about the early years of the nest and had come to the place where he philosophizes. So I asked myself then, he said, what's the use of going on? What's the use of dragging it out for a few years? Why prolong a doomed existence of hard work and cold and loneliness? The human race is done. The earth is done. Why not give it up? Give up, I asked myself, and all of a sudden I got the answer. Again I heard the noise, louder this time, a kind of uncertain shuffling tread, coming closer. I couldn't breathe. Life's always been a business of working hard and fighting the cold, Pa was saying. The Earth's always been a lonely place millions of miles from the next planet, and no matter how long the human race might have lived, the end would have come some night. Those things don't matter. What matters is that life is good. It has a lovely texture, like some rich cloth or fur or the petals of flowers. You've seen pictures of those, but I can't describe how they feel. Or the fire's glow. Makes everything else worthwhile. And that's as true for the last man as the first. And still the steps kept shuffling closer. It seemed to me that the inmost blanket trembled and bulged a little. Just as if they were burned into my imagination, I kept seeing those peering, frozen eyes. So right then and there, Pa went on, and now I could tell that he heard the steps too, and was talking loud so we maybe wouldn't hear them. Right then and there, I told myself that I was going on as if had all eternity ahead of us. I'd have children and teach them all I could. I'd get them to read books. I'd plan for the future. Try to enlarge and seal the nest. I'd do what I could to keep everything beautiful and growing. I'd keep alive my feelings of wonder even at the cold and the dark and the distant stars. But then the blanket actually did move and lift. And there was a bright light somewhere behind it. Excuse me. Pa's voice stopped and his eyes turned to the widening slit, and his hand went out until it touched and gripped the handle of the hammer beside him. In through the blanket stepped the beautiful young lady. She stood there looking at us the strangest way, and she carried something bright and unwinking in her hand. And two other faces peered over her shoulders, men's faces, staring. Well, my heart couldn't have been stopped for more than 4 or 5 beats before I realized she was wearing a suit and helmet like Pa's homemade ones, only fancier, and that the men were too, and that the frozen folks certainly wouldn't be wearing those. Also, I noticed that the bright thing in her hand was just a kind of flashlight. The silence kept on while I swallowed hard a couple of times. And after that there was all sorts of jabbering and commotion. They were simply people, you see. We hadn't been the only ones to survive. We just thought so, for natural enough reasons. These 3 people had survived and quite a few others with them. And when we found out how they'd survive, Pa let out the biggest whoop of joy. They were from Los Alamos, and they were getting their heat and power from atomic energy. Just using the uranium and plutonium intended for bombs, they had enough to go on for thousands of years. They had a regular little airtight city with airlocks and all. They even generated electric light and grew plants and animals by it. At this, Pa let out a second whoop, waking Ma from her faint. But if we were flabbergasted at them, they were double flabbergasted at us. One of the men kept saying, "But it's impossible, I tell you. You can't maintain an air supply without hermetic sealing. It's simply impossible." That was after he had got his helmet off and was using our air. Meanwhile, the young lady kept looking around at us as if we were saints and telling us we'd done something amazing. And suddenly she broke down and cried. They'd been scouting around for survivors, but they'd never expected to find any in a place like this. They had rocket ships at Los Alamos and plenty of chemical fuel. As for liquid oxygen, all you had to do was go out and shovel the air blanket at the top level. So after they'd got things going smoothly at Los Alamos, which had taken years, they decided to make some trips to likely places where there might be other survivors. No good trying long distance radio signals, of course, since there was no atmosphere to carry them around the curve of the Earth. Well, they'd found other colonies in Argonne and Brookhaven and way around the world at Harwell and Tanatuva, and now they'd been giving our city a look, not really expecting to find anything. But they had an instrument that noticed the faintest heat waves, and it had told them that there was something warm down here, so they'd landed to investigate. Of course, we hadn't heard them land since there was no air to carry the sound, and they'd had to investigate around quite a while before finding us. Their instruments had given them a wrong steer, and they'd wasted some time in the building across the street. By now, all 5 adults were talking like 60. Pa was demonstrating to the men how he'd worked the fire and got rid of the ice in the chimney and all that. Ma had perked up wonderfully and was showing the young lady her cooking and sewing stuff and even asking how the women dressed at Los Alamos. The strangers marveled at everything and praised it to the skies. I could tell from the way they wrinkled their noses that they found the nest a bit smelly, but they never mentioned that at all, and just asked bushels of questions. In fact, there was so much talking and excitement that Pa forgot about things, and it wasn't until they were all getting groggy that he looked and found the air had all boiled away in the pail. He got another bucket of air quick from behind the blankets. Of course, that started them all laughing and jabbering again. The newcomers even got a little drunk. They weren't used to so much oxygen. Funny thing, though, I didn't do much talking at all. And Sis hung on to Ma all the time and hid her face when everybody looked at her. I felt pretty uncomfortable and disturbed myself, even about the young lady. Glimpsing her outside there, I'd had all sorts of mushy thoughts, but now I was just embarrassed and scared of her, even though she tried to be nice as anything to me. I sort of wish they'd all quit crowding the nest and let us be alone and get our feelings straightened out. And when the newcomers began to talk about our all going to Los Alamos as if they were taken for granted, I could see that something of the same feeling struck Pa and Ma too. Pa got very silent all of a sudden, and Ma kept telling the young lady, but I wouldn't know how to act there, and I haven't any clothes." The strangers were puzzled like anything at first, but then they got the idea. As Pa kept saying, "It just doesn't seem right to let this fire go out." Well, the strangers are gone, but they're coming back. It hasn't been decided yet just what will happen. Maybe the nest will be kept up as what one of the strangers called a survival school. Or maybe we will join the pioneers who are going to try to establish a new colony at the uranium mines at Great Slave Lake or in the Congo. Of course, now that the strangers are gone, I've been thinking a lot about Los Alamos and those other tremendous colonies. I'm hankering to see them for myself. You ask me, Pa wants to see them too. He's been getting pretty thoughtful, watching Ma and Sis perk up. "It's different now that we know others are alive," he explains to me. "Your mother doesn't feel so hopeless anymore. Neither do I, for that matter. Not having to carry the whole responsibility for keeping the human race going, so to speak, it scares a person. I looked around at the blanket walls and the fire and the pails of air boiling away, and Ma and Sis sleeping in the warmth and the flickering light. It's not going to be easy to leave the nest. It's no, that's me. That's the kid. It's not going to be easy to leave the nest, I said, wanted to cry, kind of. It's so small and there's just the four of us. I get scared at the idea of a big place and a lot of strangers. He nodded and put another piece of coal in the fire. Then he looked at the little pile and grinned suddenly and put a couple of handfuls on, just as if it was one of our birthdays or Christmas. You'll quickly get over that feeling, son, he said. The trouble with the world was that it kept getting smaller and smaller till it ended with just the nest. Now it'll be good to have a real huge world again, the way it was in the beginning. And I guess he's right. Oh god, this last sentence, oh my god, I'm sorry, my dear scholars. You think the beautiful young lady will wait for me till I grow up? I'll be 20 in only 10 years. The end. Oh my goodness, that ending. Oh, oh, oh. Oh, getting a lot of water before we start the next story. Yeah, the pail of water, pail of air. That is quite an interesting concept. If you're wondering what a dark star is, that was a old term used for. Oh my goodness, Lady Yumi, improvise a story now. Okay, let me think. I gotta think a good one. All right then, here we go. Dinah was not afraid of the forest. She loved the woods. Her mother had taken her to the woods. Her father had taken her into the woods. She was never frightened, not like other people. She would dash through the shadows. She would dash through what little light there was from the twin moons that hung in the air. Once in a while she'd hear an animal, but she'd never see it. All the time, though, she never felt alone. Once, she thought she spotted something. A glimmering blue. A deer? No, a woman, perhaps. She had this longing to reach out to touch it. But maybe it was just a phantasm of her mind. She walked through the forest path, ignoring any of the sounds which might frighten others, reaching out, trying to find this blue that lie in the core of the great woods. Then she saw it, standing there, looking to her. No words came out, but she could hear it. No, and yet these words were not things that frightened her, as they had frightened many. She listened, and listened carefully. And then she woke up. She was in her bed, far away from the great forest, in her little room. Her pet serpent lay coiled at the foot of her bed, sleeping gently. And yet, still, though far away, she could hear those words and the comfort they brought. Hope you enjoyed that story, Lady Yumi. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. So, our next story for the night is a story by my personal favorite science fiction author, Robert Sheckley. And this story we are about to read is probably one of his most famous science fiction stories. It's been adapted for, I believe, radio. It's been adapted for television, believe it or not. Um, but it is a fantastic story. It is called Watchbird by Robert Sheckley. And it was originally published. Oh, when was it originally? Oh, no. Doesn't say when it was originally published. A little phrase before it. It says, "Strange how often the millennium has been at hand. The idea is peace on earth, see, and the way to do it is by figuring out angles." Watchbird by Robert Sheckley. When Gelson entered, he saw that the rest of the watchbird manufacturers were already present. There were 6 of them, not counting himself, and the room was blue with expensive cigar smoke. "Hi, Charlie!" one of them called as he came in. The rest broke off conversation long enough to wave a casual greeting at him. As a watchbird manufacturer, he was a member manufacturer of Salvation, he reminded himself wryly. Very exclusive. You must have a certified government contract if you want to save the human race. "The government representative isn't here yet," one of the men told him. "He's due any minute." "We're getting the green light," another said. "Fine." Gelson found a chair near the door and looked around the room. It was like a convention or a Boy Scout rally. The 6 men made up for their lack of numbers by sheer volume. The president of Southern Consolidated was talking at the top of his lungs about Watchbird's enormous durability. The 2 presidents he was talking at were grinning, nodding, one trying to interrupt with the results of a test he had run on Watchbird's resourcefulness, the other talking about the new recharging apparatus. The other 3 men were in their own little group, delivering what sounded like a panegyric to Watchbird. Gelson noticed that all of them stood straight and tall, like the saviors they felt they were. He didn't find it funny. Up to a few days ago he had felt that way himself. He had considered himself a pot-bellied, slightly balding saint. He sighed and lighted a cigarette. At the beginning of the project, he had been an he had been as his pardon me, I'm tripping over my words. At the beginning of the project, he had been as enthusiastic as the others. He had remembered saying to McIntyre, his chief engineer, "Mac, a new day is coming. Watchbird is the answer." And McIntyre had nodded very profoundly. Another Watchbird convert. How wonderful it had seemed then! A simple, reliable answer to one of mankind's greatest problems, all wrapped and packaged in a pound of uncorruptible metal, crystal, and plastic. Cool skeleton words are to resort to mouth noises. Perhaps that was the very reason he was doubting it now. Gelson suspected that you don't solve human problems so easily. There had to be a catch somewhere. After all, murder was an old problem, and Watchbird too knew a solution. "Gentlemen," they had been talking so heatedly they hadn't noticed the government representative entering. Now the room became quiet at once. "Gentlemen," the plump government man said, "the President, with the consent of Congress, has acted to form a Watchbird division for every city and town in the country." The men burst into a spontaneous shout of triumph. They were going to have their chance to save the world after all. Gelson thought and worriedly asked himself what was wrong with that. He listened carefully as the government man outlined the distribution scheme. The country was to be divided into 7 areas, each to be supplied and serviced by one manufacturer. This meant monopoly, of course, but a necessary one. Like the telephone service, it was in the public's best interests. You couldn't have competition in Watchbird service. Watchbird was for everyone. The President hopes, the representative continued, that full Watchbird service will be installed in the shortest possible time. You will have top priorities on strategic metals, manpower, and so forth. Speaking for myself, the president of Southern Consolidated said, I expect to have the first batch of watchbirds distributed within the week. Production is all set up. The rest of the men were equally ready. The factories had been prepared to roll out the watchbirds for months now. The final standardized equipment had been agreed upon, and only the presidential go-ahead had been lacking. Fine, the representative said. If that is all, I think we can. Is that a question? Yes, sir, Gelson said. I want to know if the present model is the one we are going to manufacture. Excuse me. Of course, the representative said. It's the most advanced. I have an objection. Gelson stood up. His colleagues were glaring coldly at him. Obviously, he was delaying the advent of the Golden Age. What is your objection? The representative asked. First, let me say that I am 100% in favor of a machine to stop murder. It's been needed for a long time. I object only to Watchbird's learning circuits. They serve in effect to animate the machine and give it a pseudo-consciousness. I can't approve of that. But Mr. Gilson, you yourself testified that the Watchbird would not be completely efficient unless such circuits were introduced. Without them, the Watchbirds could stop only an estimated 70% of murders. I know that, Gelson said, feeling extremely uncomfortable. I believe there might be a moral danger in allowing a machine to make decisions that are rightfully man's, he declared doggedly. Oh, come now, Gelson, one of the corporation presidents said. It's nothing of the sort. The watchbirds will only reinforce the decisions made by honest men from the beginning of time. I think that is true, the representative agreed. But I can understand how Mr. Gilson feels. It is sad we must put a human problem into the hands of a machine. Sadder still that we must have a machine enforce our laws. But I ask you to remember, Mr. Gilson, that there is no other possible way of stopping a murderer before he strikes. It would be unfair to the many innocent people killed every year if we were to restrict Watchbird on philosophical grounds. Don't you agree that I'm right? Yes, I suppose I do, Gelson said unhappily. He had told himself all that 1,000 times, but something still bothered him. Perhaps he would talk it over with McIntyre. A drink. As the conference broke up, a thought struck him. He grinned. A lot of policemen were going to be out of work. Now what do you think of that? Officer Celtrix demanded. 15 years in homicide and a machine is replacing me. He wiped a large red hand across his forehead and leaned against the captain's desk. Ain't science marvelous? 2 other policemen, late of homicide, nodded glumly. Don't worry about it, the captain said. We'll find a home for you in Larsenly, Celtrix. You'll like it here. I just can't get over it, Celtrix complained. A lousy little piece of tin and glass is going to solve all the crimes. Not quite, the captain said. The watchbirds are supposed to prevent the crimes before they happen. Then how'll they be crime? Oh, that's one of the other policemen, sorry. Then how'll they be crimes? One of the policemen asked. I mean, they can't hang you for murder until you commit one, can they? Oh, hello there, Densuo. Welcome, and thank you for the work. We are reading Watchbird by Robert Sheckley. That's not the idea, the captain said. The watchbirds are supposed to stop a man before he commits a murder. Then no one arrests him? Celtrix asked. I don't know how they're going to work that out, the captain admitted. The men were silent for a while. The captain yawned and examined his watch. The thing I don't understand, Celtrix said, still leaning on the captain's desk, is just how do they do it? How did it start, Captain? The captain studied Celtric's face for possible irony. After all, Watchbird had been in the papers for months. But then he remembered that Celtrix, like his sidekicks, rarely bothered to turn past the sports page. Well, the captain said, trying to remember what he had read in the Sunday supplements. These scientists were working on criminology. They were studying murderers to find out what made them tick. So they found that murderers throw out a different sort of brainwave from ordinary people. And their glands act funny too. All this happens when they're about to commit a murder. So these scientists worked out a special machine to flash red or something when these brainwaves turned on. Scientists, Celtrix said bitterly. Well, after the scientists had this machine, they didn't know what to do with it. It was too big to move around, and murderers didn't drop in often enough to make it flash. So they built it into a smaller unit and tried it out in a few police stations. I think they tried one upstate, but it didn't work so good. You couldn't get to the crime in time. That's why they built the watchbirds. I don't think they'll stop no criminals, one of the policemen insisted. They certainly will. They sure will. I read the test results. They can smell him out before he commits a crime. And when they reach him, they give him a powerful shock or something. It'll stop him. Duckbeam, hey, not sure if you heard it today, but you're amazing. I'm proud of you. Keep being strong and keep smiling. I don't know the battles you are going through, if any, but you are strong. You will win. Don't forget, you are amazing and loved. Hope you have a blessed day. Oh, that's a wonderful message, Duckbeam, and welcome. We are reading Watchbird by Robert Sheckley. That'll give me time to get another drink of water. You're closing up homicide, Captain? Celtrix asked. Nope, the captain said. I'm leaving a skeleton crew in until we see how these birds do. Ha! Celtrix said. Skeleton crew. That's funny. Sure, the captain said. Anyhow, I'm going to leave some men on. It seems the birds don't stop all murders. Why not? Some murderers don't have these brain waves, the captain answered, trying to remember what the newspaper article had said, or their glands don't work or something. Which ones don't they stop? Celtrix asked with professional curiosity. I don't know, but I hear they got the damn things fixed, so they're gonna stop all of them soon. How they work that? How they working that? They learn. The watchbirds. I mean, just like people. You're kidding me. Nope. Well, Celtrix said, I think I'll just keep old Betsy Oil just in case. You can't trust these scientists. Right. Birds, Celtrix scoffed. Over the town, the watchbird soared in a long, lazy curve. Its aluminum hide glistened in the morning sun. and dots of light danced on its stiff wings. Silently it flew. Silently, but with all senses functioning, built-in built-in kinesthetics told the watchbird where it was and held it in a long search curve. Its eyes and ears operated as one unit, searching, seeking. And then something happened. The watchbird's electronically fast reflexes picked up the edge of a sensation. A correlation center tested it, matching it with electrical and chemical data in its memory files. A relay tripped. Down the watchbird spiraled, coming in on the increasingly strong sensation. It smelled the outpouring of certain glands, tasted a deviant brainwave. Fully alerted and armed, it spun and banked in the bright morning sunlight. Donnelly was so intent he didn't see the watchbird coming. He had his gun poised and his eyes pleaded with the big grocer. Don't come. I can't do an accent for this. I don't want it to be offensive. Don't come no closer. You lousy little punk, the grocer said and took another step forward. Rob me? I'll break every bone in your puny body. The grocer, too stupid or too courageous to understand the threat of the gun, advanced on the little thief. All right, Donnelly said in a thorough state of panic. All right, sucker, take... A bolt of electricity knocked him on his back. The gun went off, smashing a breakfast food display. What in hell? The grocer asked, staring at the stunned thief. And then he saw a flash of silver wings. Well, I'm really damned. Those watchbirds work. He stared until the wings disappeared in the sky. Then he telephoned the police. Sorry. The watchbird returned to its search curve. His thinking center correlated the new facts he had learned about murder. Several of these he hadn't known before. This new information was simultaneously flashed to all the other watchbirds, and their information was flashed back to him. New information methods, definitions, were constantly passing between them. Now that the watchbirds were rolling off the assembly line in a steady stream, Gelson allowed himself to relax. A loud, contented hum filled his plant. Orders were being filed on time, with top priorities given to the biggest cities in his area, and working down to the smallest towns. All smooth, Chief, McIntyre said, coming in the door. He had just completed a routine inspection. Fine, have a seat. The big engineer sat down and lighted a cigar. We've been working on this for some time, Gelson said when he couldn't think of anything else. We sure have, McIntyre agreed. He leaned back and inhaled deeply. He had been one of the consulting engineers on the original Watchbird. That was 6 years back. He had been working for Gelson ever since, and the men had become good friends. The thing I wanted to ask you was this. Gelson paused. He couldn't think how to phrase what he wanted. Instead he asked, What do you think of the watchbirds, Mac? Who, me? The engineer grinned nervously. He had been eating, drinking, and sleeping watchbird ever since its inception. He had never found it necessary to have an attitude. Why, I think it's great. I don't mean that, Gelson said. He realized that what he wanted was to have someone understand his point of view. I mean, do you figure there might be some danger in machine thinking? I don't think so, Chief. Why do you ask? Look, I'm no scientist or engineer. I've just handled cost and production and let you boys worry about how. But as a layman, Watchbird is starting to frighten me. No reason for that. I don't like the idea of the learning circuits. But why not? Then McIntyre grinned again. I know you're like a lot of people, Chief, afraid your machines are going to wake up and say, "What are we doing here? Let's go out and rule the world." Is that it? Maybe something like that, Gelson admitted. No chance of it, McIntyre said. The watchwords are complex, I'll admit, but an MIT calculator is a whole lot more complex, and it hasn't got consciousness. No, but the watchbirds can learn. Sure, so can all the new calculators. Do you think they'll team up with the watchbirds? Another drink of water. Oh my goodness. Gelson felt annoyed at McIntyre, and even more annoyed at himself for being ridiculous. It's a fact that the watchbirds can put their learning into action. No one is monitoring them. That's the trouble, McIntyre said. I've been thinking of getting out of Watchbird. Gelson hadn't realized it until that moment. Look, Chief, McIntyre said, will you take an engineer's word on this? Let's hear it. The watchbirds are no more dangerous than an automobile, an IBM calculator, or a thermometer. They have no more consciousness or relation than those things. The watchbirds are built to respond to certain stimuli and to carry out certain operations when they receive that stimuli. And the learning circuits? You have to have those, McIntyre said patiently as though explaining the whole thing to a 10-year-old. The purpose of the watchbird is to frustrate all murder attempts, right? Well, only certain murderers give out these stimuli. In order to stop all of them, the watchbird has to search out new definitions of murder and correlate them with what it already knows. I think it's inhuman, Gelson said. That's the best thing about it. The watchbirds are unemotional. Their reasoning is non-anthropomorphic. You can't bribe them or drug them. You shouldn't fear them either. The intercom on Gelson's desk buzzed. He ignored it. I know all this, Gelson said, but still, sometimes I feel like the man who invented dynamite. He thought it would only be used for blowing up tree stumps. You didn't invent Watchbird. I still feel morally responsible because I manufacture them. The intercom buzzed again, and Gelson irritably punched a button. The reports are in on the first week of Watchbird operation, his secretary told him. How do they look? Wonderful, sir. Send them in 15 minutes. Gelson switched the intercom off and turned back to McIntyre, who was cleaning his fingernails with a wooden match. Don't you think that this represents a trend in human thinking? The mechanical god? The electronic father? Chief, McIntyre said, I think you should study Watchbird more closely. Do you know what's built into the circuits? Only generally. First, there is a purpose, which is to stop living organisms from committing murder. 2. Murder may be defined as an act of violence, consisting of breaking, mangling, maltreating, or otherwise stopping the functions of a living organism by a living organism. 3. Most murderers are detectable by certain chemical and electrical charges. Private Maverick Asimov. This is not an Asimov story, surprisingly. This is Robert Sheckley. McIntyre paused to light another cigarette. Those conditions take care of the routine functions. Then, for the learning circuits, there are 2 more conditions. 4. There are some living organisms who commit murder without the signs mentioned in 3. 5. These can be detected by data applicable to condition 2. I see. You realize how foolproof it is? I suppose so. Gelson hesitated a moment. I guess that's all. Right, the engineer said and left. Gelson thought for a few moments. There couldn't be anything wrong with the watchbirds. Send in the reports, he said into the intercom. High above the lighted buildings of the city, the watchbirds soared. It was dark, but in the distance the watchbird could see another, and another beyond that, for this was a large city. To prevent murder. There was more to watch for now. New information had crossed the invisible network that connected all watchbirds. New data, new ways of detecting the violence of murder. There! The edge of a sensation. Two watchbirds dipped simultaneously. One had received the scent of a fraction of a second before the other. He continued down while the others resumed monitoring. Condition 4. There are some living organisms who commit murder without the signs mentioned in Condition 3. Through his new information, the Watchbird knew by extrapolation that this organism was bent on murder, even though the characteristic chemical and electrical smells were absent. The Watchbird, all senses acute, closed in on the organism. He found what he wanted, and dive. Roger Greco leaned against a building, his hands in his pockets. In his left hand was the cool butt of a .45. Greco waited patiently. He wasn't thinking of anything in particular, just relaxing against a building waiting for a man. Greco didn't know why the man was to be killed. He didn't care. Greco's lack of curiosity was part of his value. The other part was his skill. One bullet, neatly placed in the head of a man he didn't know. It didn't excite him or sicken him. It was a job, just like anything else. You killed a man. So, as Greco's victim stepped out of a building, Greco lifted the .45 out of his pocket. He released the safety and braced the gun with his right hand. He still wasn't thinking of anything as he took aim, and was knocked off his feet. Greco thought he had been shot. He struggled up again and looked around and sighted foggily on his victim. Again, he was knocked down. This time he lay on the ground, trying to draw a bead. He never thought of stopping, for Greco was a craftsman. With the next blow, everything went black. Permanently. Because the Watchbird's duty was to protect the object of violence, at whatever cost to the murderer. The victim walked to his car. He hadn't noticed anything unusual. Everything had happened in silence. Gelson was feeling pretty good. The watchwords had been operating perfectly. Crimes of violence had been cut in half and cut again. Dark alleys were no longer mouths of horror. Parks and playgrounds were not places to shun after dark. Oh, thank you for the hydrate, Lady Yumi. Thank you. Of course, there were still robberies, petty thievery flourished, and embezzlement, larceny, forgery, and 100 other crimes. But that wasn't so important. You could regain lost money, never a lost life. Gelson was ready to admit that he had been wrong about the watchbirds. They were doing a job that humans had been unable to accomplish. The first hint of something wrong came that morning. McIntyre came into his office. He stood silently in front of Gelson's desk, looking annoyed and a little embarrassed. "What's the matter, Mac?" Gelson asked. "One of the watchbirds went to work on a slaughterhouse man. Knocked him out. Gelson thought about it for a moment. Yes, the watchbirds would do that. With their new learning circuits, they had probably defined the killing of animals as murders. Tell the packers to mechanize their slaughtering, Gelson said. I never liked that business myself. All right, McIntyre said. He pursed his lips, then shrugged his shoulders and left. Gelson stood beside his desk thinking. Couldn't the watchbirds differentiate between a murderer and a man engaged in a legitimate profession? No, evidently not. To them, murder was murder. No exceptions. He frowned. That might take a little ironing out in the circuits. But not too much, he decided hastily. Just make them a little more discriminating. He sat down again and buried himself in paperwork, trying to avoid the edge of an old fear. Excuse me. They strapped the prisoner into the chair and fitted the electrode to his leg. Oh, he moaned, only half conscious now of what they were doing. They fitted the helmet over his shaved head and tightened the last straps. He continued to moan softly. And then the watchbirds swept in. How he had come, no one knew. Prisons are large and strong, with many locked doors. But the watchbird was there. To stop a murder. Get that thing out of here! The warden shouted and reached for the switch. The watchbird knocked him down. Stop that! A guard screamed and grabbed for the switch himself. He was knocked to the floor beside the warden. This isn't murder, you idiot! Another guard said. He drew his gun to shoot down the glittering, wheeling metal bird. Anticipating, the watchbird smashed him back against the wall. There was silence in the room. After a while, the man in the helmet started to giggle. Then he stopped. The watchbird stood on guard, fluttering in midair, making sure no murder was done. New data flashed along the watchbird network. Unmonitored, independent, the thousands of watchbirds received and acted upon it. Oh dear. Wastes, if you are still here, could you please take care of that? Speaking of machines, their own thoughts. Because I don't think I can get rid of it. I think Wastes, if you're still here, I would appreciate getting rid of the bot. New data flashed along the watchbird network, unmonitored, independent. The thousands of watchbirds received and acted upon it. The breaking, mangling, or otherwise stopping the functions of a living organism by a living organism. New acts to stop. Damn you, get going! Farmer Ulster shouted and raised his whip again. The horse balked and the wagon rattled and shook as he edged sideways. You lousy hunk of pig meal, get going! The farmer yelled and he raised the whip again. It never fell. An alert watchbird, sensing violence, had knocked him out of his seat. A living organism? What is a living organism? The watchbirds extended their definitions as they became aware of more facts. And of course, this gave them more work. The deer was just visible at the edge of the woods. The hunter raised his rifle and took careful aim. He didn't have time to shoot. Excuse me? With his free hand, Gelson mopped perspiration from his face. "All right," he said into the telephone. He listened to the stream of vit- vit- vituperation from the other end, then placed the receiver gently in its cradle. "What was that one?" McIntyre asked. He was unshaven, tie loose, shirt unbuttoned. "Another fisherman," Gelson said. "It seems the watchbirds won't let him fish even though his family is starving. What are we going to do about it, he wants to know." "How many hundred is that?" "I don't know. I haven't opened the mail." "Well, I figured out where the trouble is," McIntyre said gloomily, with the air of a man who knows just how he blew up the earth after it was too late. "Let's hear it." "Everybody took it for granted that we wanted all murder stopped. We figured the watchbirds would think as we do. We ought to have qualified the conditions." "I've got an idea," Gelson said, "that we'd have to know just why and what murder is before we could qualify the conditions properly. And if we knew that, we wouldn't need the watchbirds." "Oh, I don't know about that. They just have to be told that something which looked like a They just have to be told that some things which look like murder are not murder." "But why should they stop fishermen?" Gelson asked. "Why shouldn't they? Fish and animals are living organisms. We just don't think that killing them is murder." The telephone rang. Gelson glared at it and punched the intercom. "I told you no more calls, no matter what." "This is from Washington," his secretary said. "I thought you'd—" "Sorry." Gelson picked up the telephone. "Yes, certainly. Certainly is a mess. Have they? All right, I certainly will." "Short and sweet," he told McIntyre. "We're to shut down temporary." "That won't be so easy," McIntyre said. "The watchbirds operate independent of any central control, you know. They come back once a week for a repair checkup. We'll have to turn them off then, one by one." "Well, let's get to it. Monroe over on the coast has shut down about a quarter of his birds." "I think I can dope out a restricting circuit," McIntyre said. "Fine," Gelson replied bitterly. "You make me very happy." The watchbirds were learning rapidly, expanding and adding to their knowledge. Loosely defined abstractions were extended, acted upon, and re-extended. To stop murder. Metal and electrons reason well, but not in a human fashion. A living organism? Any living organism. The watchbirds set themselves the task of protecting all living things. The fly buzzed around the room, lighting on a tabletop, pausing a moment, then darting to a windowsill. The old man stalked in, a rolled newspaper in his hand. Murderer! The watchbird swept down and saved the fly in the nick of time. The old man writhed on the floor a minute and then was silent. He had been given only a mild shock, but had been enough for his fluttery, cranky heart. His victim had been saved, though, and this was the important thing. Save the victim and give the aggressor his just deserts. Gelson demanded angrily, "Why aren't they being turned off?" The assistant control engineer gestured. In a corner of the repair room lay the senior control engineer. He was just regaining consciousness. He tried to turn one of them off," the assistant engineer said. Both his hands were knotted together. He was making a visible effort not to shake. "That's ridiculous! They haven't got any sense of self-preservation." "Then turn them off yourself. Besides, I don't think any more are going to come." What could have happened? Gelson began to piece it together. The watchbirds still hadn't decided on the limits of a living organism. When some of them were turned off in the Monroe plants, the rest must have correlated the data. So they had been forced to assume that they were living organisms as well. Thank you, FT Wastes. Much appreciated. No one had ever told them otherwise. Certainly, they carried on most of the functions of living organisms. Then the old fears hit him. Gelson trembled and hurried out of the repair room. He wanted to find McIntyre in a hurry. The nurse handed the surgeon the sponge. Scalpel? She started in his hand. He started to make the first incision. Then he was aware of a disturbance. Who let that thing in? I don't know, the nurse said. Her voice muffled by the mask. Get it out of here! Thank you for the hydrate. The nurse waved her arms at the bright winged thing, but it fluttered over her head. The surgeon proceeded with the incision as long as he was able. The watchbird drove him away and stood guard. Telephone the watchbird company, the surgeon ordered. Get them to turn the thing off! The watchbird was preventing violence to a living organism. The surgeon stood by helplessly while his patient died. Fluttering high above the network of highways, the watchbird watched and waited. It had been constantly working for weeks now without rest or repair. Rest and repair were impossible because the watchbird couldn't allow itself, a living organism, to be murdered. And that was what happened when watchbirds returned to the factory. There was a built-in order to return after the lapse of a certain time period, but the watchbird had a stronger order to obey: preservation of life, including its own. The definition of murder was almost infinitely extended now, impossible to cope with. But the watchbird didn't consider that. It responded to its stimuli whenever they came, and whatever their source. There was a new definition of living organism in its memory files. It had come as a result of the watchbird discovery that watchbirds were living organisms, and it had enormous ramifications. The stimuli came. For the 100th time that day, the bird wheeled and banked and dropping swiftly down to stop murder. Jackson yawned and pulled his car to a shoulder of the road. He didn't notice the glittering dot in the sky. There was no reason for him to. Jackson wasn't contemplating murder by any human definition. This was a good spot for a nap, he decided. He'd been driving for 7 straight hours, and his eyes were starting to fog. He reached out to turn off the ignition key, and was knocked back against the side of the car. "What in hell's wrong with you?" he asked indignantly. "All I want to do is—" He reached for the key again, and again he was smacked back. Jackson knew better than to try a third time. He had been listening to the radio, and he knew what the watchbirds did to stubborn violators. "You mechanical jerk," he said to the waiting metal bird. "A car's not alive. I'm not trying to kill it." But the watchbird only knew that a certain operation resulted in stopping an organism. The car was certainly a functioning organism. Wasn't it of metal, as were the watchbirds? Didn't it run? McIntyre said, "Without repairs, they'll run down." He shoved a pile of specification sheets out of his way. "How soon?" Gelson asked. 6 months to a year. Say a year, barring accidents." "A year," Gelson said. "In the meantime, everything is stopping dead. Do you know the latest?" "What?" The watchbirds have decided that the Earth is a living organism. They won't allow farmers to break ground for plowing. And of course, everything else is a living organism: rabbits, beetles, flies, wolves, mosquitoes, lions, crocodiles, crows, and smaller forms of life such as bacteria. I know. And you tell me they'll wear out in 6 months or a year? What happens now? What are we going to eat in 6 months? The engineer rubbed his chin. We'll have to do something quick and fast. Ecological balance has gone to hell. Fast isn't the word. Instantaneous would be better. Gelson lighted his 35th cigarette for the day. At least I have the bitter satisfaction of saying I told you so. Although I'm just as responsible as the rest of the machine-worshipping fools. McIntyre wasn't listening. He was thinking about watchbirds. Like the rabbit plague in Australia. The death rate is mounting, Gelson said. Famine, floods, can't cut down trees, doctors can't... What was that you said about Australia? The rabbits, McIntyre repeated. Hardly any left in Australia now. Why? How was it done? Oh, found some kind of germ that attacked only rabbits. I think it was propagated by mosquitoes. Work on that, Gelson said. You might have something. I want you to get on the telephone, ask for an emergency hookup with the engineers of the other companies. Hurry it up. Together you may be able to dope out something. Right, McIntyre said. He grabbed a handful of blank paper and hurried to the telephone. What did I tell you? Officer Celtic said. He grinned at the captain. Didn't I tell you scientists were nuts? I didn't say you were wrong, did I? The captain asked. No, but you weren't sure. Well, I'm sure now. You'd better get going. There's plenty of work for you. I know. Celtic drew his revolver from its holster, checked it, and put it back. Are all the boys back, Captain? All? The captain laughed humorously. Homicide has increased by 50%. There's more murder now than there's ever been. Sure, Celtic said. The watchbirds are too busy guarding cars and slugging spiders. He started toward the door, then turned for a parting shot. Take my word, Captain. Machines are stupid. The captain nodded. Thousands of watchbirds trying to stop countless millions of murders, a hopeless task. But the watchbirds didn't hope. Without consciousness, they experienced no sense of accomplishment, no fear of failure. Patiently, they went about their jobs, obeying each stimulus as it came. They couldn't be everywhere at the same time, but it wasn't necessary to be. People learned quickly what the watchbirds didn't like and refrained from doing it. It just wasn't safe. With their high speed and super fast senses, the watchbirds got around quickly. And now they meant business. In their original directive, there had been a provision made for killing a murderer. If all other means failed, why spare a murderer? Cool Skeleton, I'll have to get going for now. Thank you for reading. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming, Cool Skeleton. Why spare a murderer? It backfired. The watchbirds extracted the fact that murder and crimes of violence had increased geometrically since they had begun operation. This was true because their new definitions increased the possibilities of murder. But to the watchbirds, the rise showed that the first methods had failed. Simple logic. If A doesn't work, try B. The watchbirds, shocked to kill. Slaughterhouses in Chicago stopped, and cattle starved to death in their pens because farmers in the Midwest couldn't cut hay or harvest grain. No one had told the watchbirds that all life depends on carefully balanced murders. Starvation didn't concern the watchbirds since it was an act of omission. Their interest lay only in acts of commission. Hunters sat home glaring at the silver dots in the sky, longing to shoot them down, but for the most part they didn't try. The watchbirds were quick to sense the murderer intent and to punish it. Fishing boats swung idle at their moorings in San Pedro and Gloucester. Fish were living organisms. Farmers cursed and spat and died trying to harvest the crop. Grain was alive and thus worthy of protection. Potatoes were as important to the watchbird as any other living organism. The death of a blade of grass was equal to the assassination of a president. To the watchbirds. Sophia Ignacy, which story is this? Terrifying. It's Watchbird by Robert Sheckley. It is his most famous story. Well, one of them. And of course, certain machines were living. This followed, since the watchbirds were machines and living. God help you if you maltreated your radio. Turning it off meant killing it. Obviously, its voice was silenced. The red glow of its tubes faded. It grew cold. The watchbirds tried to guard their other charges. Wolves were slaughtered, trying to kill rabbits. Rabbits were electrocuted, trying to eat vegetables. Creepers were burned out in the act of strangling trees. A butterfly was executed, caught in the act of outraging a rose. This control was spasmodic because of the fewness of the watchbirds. 1 billion watchbirds couldn't have carried out the ambitious project set by the thousands. The effect was of a murderous force. 10,000 bolts of irrational lightning raging across the country, striking 1,000 times a day. Lightning which anticipated your moves and punished your intentions. "Gentlemen, please," the government representative begged. "We must hurry." The 7 manufacturers stopped talking. "Before we begin this meeting formally," the president of Monroe said, "I want to say something. We do not feel ourselves responsible for this unhappy state of affairs. It was a government project. The government must accept the responsibility, both moral and financial." Gelson shrugged his shoulders. It was hard to believe that these men just a few weeks ago had been willing to accept the glory of saving the world. Now they wanted to shrug off the responsibility when the salvation went amiss. "I'm positive that need not concern us now," the representative assured him. "We must hurry. Your engineers have done an excellent job. I am proud of the cooperation you have shown in this emergency. You are hereby empowered to put the outlined plan into action." "Wait a moment. Wait a minute," Gelson said. "There is no time. The plan is no good." "Don't you think it will work?" "Of course it will work, but I'm afraid the cure will be worse than the disease." The manufacturers looked as though they would have enjoyed throttling Gelson. He didn't hesitate. "Haven't we learned yet?" he asked. "Don't you see that you can't cure human problems by mechanization?" "Mr. Gelson," the president of Monroe said, "I would enjoy hearing you philosophize, but unfortunately people are being killed. Crops are being ruined. There is famine in some sections of the country already. The watchbirds must be stopped at once." Murder must be stopped too. I remember all of us agreeing upon that. But this is not the way. "What would you suggest?" the representative asked. Gelson took a deep breath. What he was about to say took all the courage he had. "Let the watchbirds run down by themselves," Gelson suggested. There was a near riot. The government representative broke it up. "Let's take our lesson," Gelson urged. "Admit that we were wrong. Trying to cure human problems by mechanical means. Start again. Use machines, yes, but not as judges and teachers and fathers." "Ridiculous," the representative said coldly. "Mr. Gelson, you are overwrought. I suggest you control yourself." He cleared his throat. All of you are ordered by the President to carry out the plan you have submitted. He looked sharply at Gelson. Not to do so will be treason. I'll cooperate to the best of my ability, Gelson said. Good! Those assembly lines must be rolling within the week. Gelson walked out of the room alone. Now he was confused again. Had he been right, or was he just another visionary? Certainly he hadn't explained himself with much clarity. Did he know what he meant? Gelson cursed under his breath. He wondered why he couldn't ever be sure of anything. Weren't there any values he could hold on to? He hurried to the airport and to his plant. The watchbird was operating erratically now. Many of its delicate parts were out of line, worn by almost continuous operation, but gallantly it responded when the stimuli came. A spider was attacking a fly. The watchbird swooped down to the rescue. Simultaneously, it became aware of something overhead. The watchbird wheeled to meet it. There was a sharp crackle, and a powerboat whizzed by the watchbird's wing. Angrily, it spat a shockwave. The attacker was heavily insulated. Again, it spat at the watchbird. This time, a bolt smashed through a wing. The watchbird darted away, but the attacker went after it in a burst of speed, throwing out more crackling power. The watchbird fell, but managed to send out its message. Urgent! A new menace to living organisms, and this was the deadliest yet. Other watchbirds around the country integrated the message. Their thinking centers searched for an answer. Well, Chief, they bagged 50 today, McIntyre said, coming into Gelson's office. Fine, Gelson said, not looking at the engineer. Not so fine. McIntyre sat down. Lord, I'm tired. It was 72 yesterday. I know. On Gelson's desk were several dozen lawsuits, which he was sending to the government with a prayer. They'll pick up again, though, McIntyre said confidently. The Hawks are especially built to hunt down watchbirds. They're stronger, faster, and they've got better armor. We really rolled them out in a hurry, huh? We sure did. The watchbirds are pretty good, too, McIntyre had to admit. They're learning to take cover. They're trying a lot of stunts. You know, each one that goes down tells the others something. Gelson didn't answer. But anything the watchbirds can do, the Hawks can do better, McIntyre said cheerfully. The Hawks have special learning circuits for hunting. They're more flexible than the watchbirds. They learn faster. Gelson gloomily stood up, stretched, and walked to the window. The sky was blank. Looking out, he realized that his uncertainties were over. Right or wrong, he made up his mind. Tell me, he said, still watching the sky. What will the Hawks hunt after they get all the watchbirds? Huh? McIntyre said. Why? Just to be on the safe side, you'd better design something to hunt down the Hawks. Just in case, I mean. You think? All I know is that the Hawks are self-controlled. So are the watchbirds. Remote control would have been too slow, the argument went on. The idea was to get the watchbirds and get them fast. That meant no restricting circuits. We can dope something out, McIntyre said uncertainly. You've got an aggressive machine up in the air now. A murder machine. Before that, it was an anti-murder machine. Your next gadget will have to be even more self-sufficient, won't it? McIntyre didn't answer. I don't hold you responsible, Gelson said. It's me. It's everyone. In the air outside was a swift-moving dot. That's what comes, said Gelson, of giving a machine the job that was our own responsibility. Overhead, a hawk was zeroing in on a watchbird. The armored murder machine had learned a lot in a few days. Its sole function was to kill. At present, it was impelled towards a certain type of living organism, metallic like itself. But the hawk had just discovered that there were other types of living organisms too, which had to be murdered. I love that story. That is such a chilling story. Oh, oh. Okay. Robert Sheckley is a marvelous author. His stories can be he likes to write satire in science fiction, very comedic at times, but they always are very telling, and he doesn't get a lot of notice either. Um, Watchbird is probably one of his best short stories. I'm going to take a quick break and I will be right back to read the next story. So I will put you on intermission and we will continue after that. Oh my goodness. Thank you for, hello there, my dear scholars. We are back. I think I might be able to manage one more story for the evening. It's a shorter story, I think, so it'd be a little bit easier. I was going to do a longer story, but I think given my vocal cords, it might be best to end on a shorter story. So this next story we are going to read is a short one by the science fiction author Frederick Brown. Frederick Brown has written quite a few famous short stories. If you are familiar with Star Trek, the series Star Trek, um, he was also the in he was sort of it's a funny story. He wrote a short story called Arena, if you've ever heard of that story, which the production office of Star Trek, the original Star Trek, accidentally discovered that their newest script bore a striking resemblance to it. So they very quickly called Frederick Brown to ask permission to use the story so they wouldn't get in trouble, and Frederick Brown gave their permission, and that is why he's credited in the episode Arena. Arena also had an adaptation in, I believe, Outer Limits, the original Outer Limits, mind you. But tonight's story is a short one, and it is entitled "And the Gods Laughed" by Frederick Brown. And the little transcript thing here says, Hank was spinning quite a space lie, something about earrings wearing their owners. The crew got a boot out of the yarn until they got to thinking. You know how it is when you're with a work crew on one of the asteroids. You're there, stuck for the month, stuck for the month you signed up for, with four other guys and nothing to do but talk. Space on the little tugs that you go in and return in and live in while you're there is at such a premium that there isn't room for a book or a magazine nor equipment for games. And you're out of radio range except for the usual once a terrestrial day system wide newscasts. So talking is the only indoor sport you can go in for. Talking and listening. You've plenty of time for both because a workday in spacesuits is only 4 hours, and that with four 15-minute back to the ship rest periods. So you actually work only 3 hours and spend half that time getting in and out the airlock. But those are union rules, and no asteroid mining outfit tries to chisel on them. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that talk is cheap on one of those work crews. With most of the day to do nothing else, you'll listen to some real whoppers. Stories that would make the old-time Liars Club back on Earth seem like Sunday school meetings. And if your mind runs that way, you've got plenty of time to think up some yourselves. Charlie Dean was on our crew, and Charlie could tell some dillies. He'd been on Mars back in the old days when there was still trouble with the Boulets, I don't know, Boulets, and when living on Mars was a lot like living on Earth back in the days of Indian fighting. I apologize for the terms in these stories, they are old. The Boulets thought and fought a lot like Amorites, even though they were quadrupeds that looked like alligators on stilts, if you can picture an alligator on stilts, and used blowguns instead of bows and arrows. Or was it crossbows that the Amorites used against the colonists? Anyway, Charlie's just finished a whopper that was really too good for the first tryout of the trip. We just landed, you see, and we're resting up from doing nothing en route. And usually the yarns start off easy and believable, and don't work up to real depth of space line until along about the fourth week when everybody's bored stiff. So we took this head Bole, Charlie was ending up, and you know what kind of flappy little ears they've got, and we put a couple of zircon studded earrings in its ears and let it go, and back it went to the others, and then darned if. Well, I won't go on with Charlie's yawn because it hasn't got anything to do with this story, except that it brought earrings into the conversation. When Charles finished, Zeb Warris stood up and sniffed. "'Air's getting kind of bad in here," he said. "Reckon I'll go out and get my first shift over with. Anybody want to come?" Ray went with him. Our tug had equipment for only 2 men to work outside at a time, and the rest of us helped them into suits and out the lock, and then settled down for some more talk, there being nothing else to do. Zeb's remark about the air had been just a crack at Charlie's story, of course. "How'd you happen to have zircon earrings along?" Blake Powers asked Charlie, when things had quieted down again. Blake was skipper for the voyage, but now that we were anchored down on our asteroid, he was just one of the boys, until we took off again. "Eat with the slum for trading," Charlie said. "When you're going to any place in the system, that might be inhabited, and you don't know what kind of critters. You take a little of almost everything. You never know what's going to strike the fancy of any civilized or semi-civilized race you might hit. It might be mirrors. I've known dime store mirrors to bring in twice their weight in radium salt. Or it might be paper clips or harmonicas or salted peanuts or plastic statuettes. Why would you have paper clips in the future? He turned to me and said, "You know that, Hank, you've been on a first trip or two. So have you, Blank." Blake nodded. "I remember I was on the crew of the ship that landed first on Phobos. You know what the Phobinians turned out to be like, of course. They had about everything we had, and damned if we could do a lick of trading until the captain of our ship put something back in a box and happened to put a rubber band around the box. They went nuts. They'd never seen anything that had elasticity. Rubber or anything like it simply wasn't known on Phobos. We managed to find a few dozen rubber bands in the ship's office and practically bought out Phobos with them. One of the crew was wearing old-fashioned suspenders with elastic in them, and he traded them for a bucket of Phobonian celeststones. Had to hold up his pants with a piece of rope for the rest of the trip, but when he got back to Earth he was rich. Me, I was wearing a belt. I've worn suspenders ever since, but I never got back to Phobos. Not that it would matter if I did. Interplanet's doing a regular trade in rubber there now, and it's down to 20 credits a pound or thereabouts." Blake shook his head gloomily, and then turned to me. He said, "Hank, what went on Ganymede? You were on that ship that went out there a few months ago, weren't you? The first one that got through. I've never read or heard anything about that trip." "Me either," Charlie said, "except that the Ganymedians turned out to be humanoid beings about 4 feet tall and didn't wear a thing except earrings. Kind of immodest, wasn't it?" I grinned. "You wouldn't have thought so if you'd seen the Ganymedians. With them, it didn't matter. Anyway, they didn't wear earrings." "You're crazy," Charlie said. "Sure, I know you were on that expedition, and I wasn't, but you're still crazy because I had a quick look at some of the pictures they brought back. The natives wore earrings." "No," I said. "Earrings wore them." Blake sighed deeply. I knew it," he said. "There was something wrong with this trip from the start. Charlie pops off the first day with a yawn that should have been worked up to gradually. And now you say, or is there something wrong with my sense of earring?" Oh my goodness, a pun in the story. Ah. Oh. Oh no, I've been ambushed by a pun. I chuckled. "Not a thing, Skipper." Charlie said, "I've heard of men buying dogs, but earrings wearing people is a new one, Hank. I hate to say it, but just consider it said." Excuse me. Anyway, I had their attention, and now was as good a time as any. I said, "If you read about the trip, you know we left Earth about 8 months ago for a 6 months round trip. There was 6 of us in the M94, me and 2 others made up the crew, and there were 3 specialists to do the studying and exploring. Not the really top flight specialists, though, because the trip was too risky to send them. That was the third ship to try for Ganymede, and the other 2 had cracked up on outer Jovian satellites that the observatories had inspired from Earth, because they were too small to show up in the scopes at that distance. When you get there, you find there's practically an asteroid belt around Jupiter, most of them so black they don't reflect light to speak of, and you can't see them till they hit you or you hit them. But most of them—" "Skip the satellites," Blake interrupted, "unless they wore earrings." "Or unless earrings wore them," said Charlie. "Neither," I admitted. "All right, so we were lucky and got through the belt and landed. Like I said, there were 6 of us. Lecky the biologist, Hayes geologist and mineralogist, and Hilda Race, who loved little flowers and was a botanist. Egad, you'd have loved Hilda at a distance. Somebody must have wanted to get rid of her, and sent her on that trip. She gushed. You know the type. And then there was Art Willis and Dick Carney. They gave Dick skipper's rating for the trip. He knew enough astrogation to get us through. So Dick was skipper and Art and I were flunkies and gunmen. Our main job was to go along with the specialists whenever they left the ship and stand guard over them against whatever dangers might pop up. And did anything pop up? Charlie demanded. I'm coming to that, I told him. We found Ganymede not so bad as places go. Gravity low, of course, but you could get around easily and keep your balance once you got used to it. The air was breathable for a couple of hours. After that, you found yourself panting like a dog. A lot of funny animals, but none of them were very dangerous. No reptilian life, all of it mammalian. But a funny kind of mammalian, if you know what I mean. Blake said, I don't want to know what you mean. Get to the natives and the earrings. I said, but of course, with animals like that, you never know whether they're dangerous until you've been around them for a while. You can't judge by size or look. Like, if you'd never seen a snake, you'd never guess that a little coral snake was dangerous, would you? And a Martian ZZ looks for all the world like an overgrown guinea pig. But without a gun, or with one for that matter, I'd rather face a grizzly bear or a... The earrings, said Blake. You were talking about earrings. I said, oh yes, earrings. Well, the natives wore them, for now I put it that way, to make it easier to tell. One earring apiece, given though they had two ears, gave them a sort of lopsided look, because they were pretty fair-sized earrings, like hoops of plain gold 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Anyway, the tribe we landed near wore them that way. We could see the village, a very primitive sort of place made of huts, from which we landed. We had a council of war and decided that 3 of us would stay in the ship and the other 3 go to the village. Lucky the biologist, and Art Willis and I with guns. We didn't know what we might run into, see? And Lecky was chosen because he was pretty much a linguist. He had a flair for languages and could talk them almost as soon as he heard them. They heard us land, and a bunch of them, about 40, I guess, met us halfway between the ship and the village. And they were friendly, funny people. Quiet and dignified, and acting not at all like you'd expect, again, sorry for the term, savage to act towards people landing out of the sky. You know how most primitives react. Either they practically worship you or else they try to kill you. We went to the village with them, and there were about 40 more of them there. They'd split forces, just as we did, for the reception committee. Another sign of intelligence. They recognized Lecky as leader and started jabbering to him in a lingo that sounded more like a pig grunting than a man talking. And pretty soon Lecky was making an experimental grunt or two in return. I drink of water. Everything seemed on the up and up and no danger. And they weren't paying much attention to Art and me, so we decided to wander off for a stroll around outside of the village to see what the country in general was like, and whether there were any dangerous beasties or whatnot. We didn't see any animals. We did see another native. He acted different from the others. Very different. He threw a spear at us and then ran, and it was Art who noticed that this native didn't wear an earring. And then breathing began to get a bit hard for us. We'd been away from the ship over an hour, so we went back to the village to collect Lecky and take him to the ship. He was getting along so well that he hated to leave, but he was starting to pant too. So we talked him into it. He was wearing one of the earrings and said they'd given it to him as a present, and he'd made them a return present of a pocket slide ruler he happened to have with him. Why a slide ruler? I asked him. Those things cost money, and we've got plenty of junk that would make them happier. That's what you think, he said. They figured out how to multiply and divide with it almost as soon as I showed it to them. I showed them how to extract square roots, and I was starting on cube roots when you fellows came back. I whistled and took a close look to see if maybe he was kidding me. He didn't seem to be. but I noticed that he was walking strangely, and well, acting just a bit strangely somehow, although I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I decided finally that he was just a bit overexcited. This was Lecky's first trip off Earth, so that was natural enough. Inside the ship, as soon as Lecky got his breath back, the last 100 yards pretty well winded him. He started in to tell Haynes and Hilda Race about the Ganymedians. Most of it was too technical for me, but I got that they had some strange contradictions in them. As far as their way of life was concerned, they were more. I'm going to skip this part. They're basically comparing them to certain natives on Earth, and I'm not going to say that. But they had brains and a philosophy and knowledge of mathematics and pure science. They told him about things about atomic structure that excited hell out of him. He was in a dither to get back to Earth where he could get at equipment to check some of those things. And he said the earring was a sign of membership in the tribe. They'd acknowledged him as a friend and compatriot and whatnot by giving it to him. Blake asked, "Was it gold?" "I'm coming to that," I told him. I was feeling cramped from sitting so long in one position on the bunk, and I stood up and stretched. There isn't much room to stretch in an asteroid tug, and my hand hit against the pistol resting in the clips on the wall. I said, "What's the pistol for, Blake?" He shrugged. "Rules. Has to be one hand weapon on every spacecraft. Heaven knows why on an asteroid ship. Unless the Council thinks someday an asteroid may get mad at us when we tow it out of orbit so it cracks up another. Say, did I ever tell you about the time we had a little 20-ton rocket tow in?" "Shut up, Blake," Charlie said. "He's just getting to those damn earrings." "Yeah, the earrings," I said. I took the pistol down from the wall and looked at it. It was an old-fashioned metal project weapon, 20-shot Cirsa 2000. It was loaded and usable, but dirty. It hurts me to see a dirty gun. I went on talking, but I sat back down on the bunk, took an old handkerchief out of my duffel box, and started to clean and polish the handgun while I talked. I said, "He wouldn't let us take the earring off. Acted just a little funny about it when Haynes wanted to analyze the metal. Told Haynes he could get one of his own if he wanted to mess with it. And then he went back to rhapsodizing over the superior knowledge the Ganymedians had shown. Next day, all of them wanted to go to the village. But we made the rule that not more than three of the six of us would be outside the ship at once. They'd have to take turns. Since Lecky could talk their grunt lingo, he and Hilda went first, and Art went along to guard them. Looked safe enough to work then proportion now. 2 scientists to 1 guard. Outside of that one native that had thrown a spear at Art and me, there hadn't been a sign of danger. And he'd looked odd and missed us by 20 feet anyway. We hadn't even bothered to shoot at him. They were back, panting for breath in less than 2 hours. Hilda Race's eyes were shining, and she was wearing one of the rings in her left ear. She looked as proud as though it was a royal crown making her Queen of Mars or something. She gushed about it, and as soon as she got her wind back and stopped panting. I went on the next trip with Lecky and Haynes. Haynes was kind of grumpy for some reason. I said they weren't going to put one of those rings in his ear, even if he did want one for analysis. They could just hand it to him or else. Again, nobody paid much attention to me after we got there, and I wandered around the village. I was on the outskirts of it when I heard a yell, and I ran back to the center of town, but fast, because it sounded like Haynes. There was a crowd around a spot in the middle of, well, call it a compound. It took me a minute to wedge my way through, scattering natives to all sides as I went. And when I got to the middle of things, Haynes was just getting up, and there was a big stain of red on the front of his white linen coat. I grabbed him to help him up and said, "Haynes, what's the matter? You hurt?" He shook his head slowly as though he was kind of dazed, and then he said, I'm alright, Hank, I'm alright. I just stumbled and fell. Then he saw me looking at that red stain and smiled. I guess it was a smile, but it didn't look natural. He said, "That's not blood, Hank. Some native red wine I happened to spill. Part of the ceremony." I started to ask what ceremony, and then I saw he was wearing one of the gold earrings. I thought that was damn funny, but he started talking to Lecky, and he looked and acted all right. Well, fairly all right. Lecky was telling him what a few of the grunts meant, and he acted awful interested. But somehow I got the idea he was pretending most of that interest so he wouldn't have to talk to me. He acted as though he was thinking hard inside, and maybe was making up a better story to cover that stain on his clothes and the fact that he changed his mind so quick about the earring. I was getting the notion that something was rotten in the state of Ganymede, but I didn't know what. I decided to keep my yap shut and my eyes open till I found out. I'd have plenty of time to study Haines later, though, so I wandered off again to the edge of the village and just outside it. And it occurred to me that if there was anything I wasn't supposed to see, I might stand a better chance of seeing it if I got under cover. There was plenty of bushes around, and I picked out a good clump of them and hid. From the way my lungs worked, I figured I had maybe a half hour before we'd have to start back for the ship. And less than half that time had gone by before I saw something. I stopped talking to hold the pistol up to the light and squinted through the barrel. It was getting pretty clean, but there were a couple of spots left up near the muzzle end. Blake said, "Let me guess, you saw a Martian troghound standing on its tail, singing Anna Laurie." "Worse than that," I said. "I saw one of those Ganymede natives get his legs bit off, and it annoyed him." "It would annoy anybody, said Blake. "Even me, and I'm a pretty mild-tempered guy. What bit them off?" "I never found out," I told him. "It was something underwater. There was a stream there going by the village, and there must have been something like crocodiles in it. Two natives came out of the village and started to wade across the stream. About halfway over, one of them got a yelp and went down. The other grabbed him and pulled him up on the other bank, and both his legs were gone just above the knees. And the damnedest thing happened. The natives with his legs off stood up on the stumps of them and started talking, or grunting quite calmly to his companion, who grunted back, and if tone of voice meant anything, he was annoyed. Nothing more. He tried walking on the stumps of his legs and found he couldn't go very fast. And then he gave a gesture that looked for all the world like a shrug, and reached up and took off his earring and held it out to the other native. And then came the strangest part. The other native took it, and the very instant the ring left the hand of the first one, the one with his legs off, he fell down dead. The other one picked up the corpse and threw it in the water and went on. And as soon as he was out of sight, I went back to get Lecky and Haines and take them to the ship. They're ready to leave when I got there. I thought I was worried a bit, but I hadn't seen anything yet. Not till I started back to the ship with Lecky and Haines. Haines, first thing I noticed, had the stain gone from the front of his coat, wine or whatever it was. Somebody managed to get it out for him, and the coat wasn't even wet. But it was torn, pierced. I hadn't noticed that before, but there was a place there through like a spear had gone through his coat. And then he happened to get in front of me, and I saw that there was another tear ripped just like it in the back of his coat. Taken together, it was like somebody pushed a spear through him from front to back, where he yelled. But if a spear had gone through him like that, then he was dead. And there he was, walking ahead of me back to the ship, with one of those earrings in his left ear. And I couldn't help but remember about that native and the thing in the river. That native was sure enough dead too, with his legs off like that. But he hadn't found it out until he'd handed that earring away. I can tell you I was plenty thoughtful that evening watching everybody, and it seemed to me like that they were all acting strange. Especially Hilda. You'd have to watch a hippopotamus acting kittenish to get an idea. Haynes and Lecky seemed thoughtful and subdued, like they were planning something, maybe. After a while, Art came up from the glory hole, and he was wearing one of those rings. Gave me a kind of shiver to realize that if what I was thinking could possibly be true, then there was only me and Dick left, and I'd better start comparing notes with Dick pretty soon. He was working on a report, but I know pretty soon he'd make his routine inspection trip through the storerooms before turning in, and I'd corner him there. Meanwhile, I watched the other four and got surer and surer, and more scared. They were trying their darnest to act natural, but once in a while one of them would slip. For one thing, they'd forget to talk. I mean, one of them would turn to another as though he was saying something, but he wouldn't. And then, as though remembering, he'd start in the middle of it, like he'd been talking without words before, telepathically. And pretty soon Dick gets up and goes out, and I followed him. We got to one of the side storerooms, and I closed the door. "Dick," I asked, "have you noticed it?" And he wanted to know what I was talking about. So I told him. I said, "Those four people out there, they aren't the ones we started with. What happened to Art and Hilda and Lecky and Haynes? What the hell goes on here? Haven't you noticed anything out of the ordinary?" And Dick sighed, kind of, and said, "Well, it didn't work. We need more practice then. Come on and we'll tell you all about it." And he opened the door and held out his hand to me, and the sleeve of his shirt pulled back a little from the wrist, and he was wearing one of those gold things, like the others, only he was wearing it as a bracelet instead of an earring. I need another drink of water. This is a longer story than I thought. I well, I was too dumbfounded to say anything. I didn't take the hand he held out, but I followed him back into the main room. And then, while Lecky was, who seemed to be the leader, I think, held a gun on me, they told me about it. And it was even screwier and worse than I dare guess. They didn't have any name for themselves because they had no language, what you really call a spoken or written language of their own. You see, they were telepathic. You don't need a language for that. If you tried to translate their thought for themselves, the nearest word you could find for it would be we, the first person plural pronoun. Individually, they identified themselves to one another by numbers rather than names. And just as they had no language of their own, they had no real bodies of their own, nor active minds of their own. They were parasitic in a sense that Earthmen can't conceive. They were entities, apart from, well, it's difficult to explain, but in a way they had no real existence when not attached to a body they could animate and think with. The easiest way to put it is that a detached earring god, which is what the Ganymedean natives called them, was asleep, dormant, ineffective, had no power of thought or motion in itself. Charlie and Blake were looking bewildered. Charlie said, "You're trying to say, Hank, that when one of them came in contact with a person, they took over that person, ran him, and thought with his mind, but, kept their own identity? And what happened to the person they took over?" I said, as near as I could make out, he stayed there too, as it were, but was dominated by the entity. I mean, there remained all his memories and his individuality, but something else was in the driver's seat, running him. Didn't matter whether he was alive or dead either, as long as his body. Where was it? Where am I? Sorry. As long as his body wasn't in too bad shape. Like Haynes, they had to kill him to put an earring on him. He was dead, in that if that ring was removed, he'd have fallen flat and never got up again, unless it was put back. Like the natives whose legs had been cut off, the entity running him had decided the body was no longer practicable for use, so he handed himself back to the other natives, see, and they'd find another body in better shape for him to use. They didn't tell me where they came from except that it was outside the solar system, nor just how they got to Ganymede. Not by themselves, though, because they couldn't even exist by themselves. They must have gotten as far as Ganymede as parasites of visitors that had landed there in some time or another, maybe millions of years ago. And they couldn't get off Ganymede, of course, till we landed there. Space travel hadn't developed on Ganymede. Charlie interrupted me again. But if they were so smart, why didn't they develop it themselves? They couldn't, I told him. They weren't any smarter than the minds they occupied. Well, a little smarter, in a way, because they could use those minds to their full capacity. And people, terrestrial or Ganymedian, don't do that. But even the full capacity of the mind of a Ganymedian savage wasn't sufficient to develop a spaceship. I'm checking how much is left in there. Oh, not too much. But now they had us. I mean, they had Lecky and Haynes and Hilda and Art and Dick, and they had our spaceship. And they were going to Earth because they knew all about it and about conditions there from our minds. They planned simply to take over Earth and run it. They didn't explain the details of how they propagate, but I gathered that there wouldn't be any shortage of earrings to go around on Earth. Earrings or bracelets or however they attach themselves. Bracelets probably, or arm or leg bands, because wearing earrings like that would be too conspicuous on Earth, and they'd have to work in secret for a while to take over a few people at a time without letting the others know what was going on. And Lecky, or the thing that was running Lecky, told me they'd been using me as a guinea pig, that they could have put a ring on me, taken me over at any time, but they wanted to check on how they were doing at imitating normal people. They wanted to know whether or not I got suspicious and guessed the truth. Drink of water. So Dick, or the thing that was running him, had kept himself out of sight under Dick's sleeve. So I got suspicious of the others. So if I got suspicious of the others, I'd talk it over with Dick, just as I really did do. And that let them know that they needed a lot more practice animating those bodies before they took the ship back to Earth to start their campaign there. And well, that was the whole story, and they told it to me to watch my reactions as a normal human. And then Lecky took a ring out of his pocket and held it out toward me with one hand, keeping the pistol on me with the other hand. He told me I might as well put it on because if I didn't, he could shoot me first and then put it on me, but that they greatly preferred to take over undamaged bodies, and that would be better for me too, if I, that is my body, didn't die first. But naturally, I didn't see it that way. I pretended to reach out for the ring hesitantly, but instead I batted the gun out of his hand and made a dive for it as it hit the floor. I got it too, just as they came for me, and I fired 3 shots into them before I saw that it wasn't even annoying them. Damn it, the only way you could stop a body animated by one of those rings is to make it fix it, so they can't move, like cutting off the legs or something. A bullet in the heart doesn't worry it. But I backed to the door and got out of it, out into the Ganymedian night, without even a coat on. It was colder than hell too, and after I got out there, there just wasn't any place to go, except back to the ship, and I wasn't going there. They didn't bother coming after me. Didn't bother. Oh, hello there, Euline20. Welcome. We are in the middle of our last story. And the gods laughed. I believe the name of the story is. It's longer than I thought it would be. They didn't bother come out after me. Didn't bother. They didn't come out after me. Didn't bother to. They knew that within 3 hours, 4 at the outside, I'd be unconscious from insufficient oxygen, if the cold or something else didn't get me first. Maybe there was some way out, but I didn't see one. I just sat down on a stone about 100 yards from the ship and tried to think of something I could do, but I didn't go anywhere with I didn't go anywhere with the butt. And there was a moment's silence, and then Charlie said, "Well?" And Blake said, "What'd you do?" "Nothing," I said. "I couldn't think of a thing to do. I just sat there." "Till morning?" "No, I lost consciousness before morning. I came to while it was still dark in the ship." Blake was looking at me with a puzzled frown. He said, "The hell? You mean—" And then Charlie let out a sudden yip and dived head first out of the bunk he had been lying on and grabbed the gun out of my hand. I just finished cleaning it and slipped the cartridge clip back in. And then with it in his hand he stood there staring at me as though he'd never seen me before. Blake said, "Sit down, Charlie. Don't you know what you're being when you're being ribbed? But better keep the gun just the same." Charlie kept the gun all right and turned it around to point at me. He said, "I'm making a damn fool out of myself all right, but Hank, roll up your sleeves." I grinned and stood up. I said, "Don't forget my ankles, too." But there was something dead serious in his face, and I didn't push him too far. Blake said, "He could even have it on him somewhere else with adhesive tape. I mean, on the 1,000,000 to 1 chance that he wasn't kidding." Charlie nodded without turning to look at Blake. He said, "Hank, I hate to ask it, but—" I sighed, then chuckled. I said, "Well, I was just going to take a shower anyway." It was hot in the ship, and I was wearing only shoes and a pair of coveralls. Paying no attention to Blake and Charlie, I slipped them off and stepped through the oilskin curtains of the little shower cubicle and turned on the water. Over the sound of the shower, I could hear Blake laughing and Charlie cursing softly to himself. And when I came out of the shower drying myself, even Charlie was grinning. Blake said, "And I thought that yarn Charlie just told was a dilly. This trip is backwards. We'll end up having to tell each other the truth." There was a sharp rapping on the hull beside the airlock, and Charlie Dean went to open it. He growled, If you tell Zeb and Ray what chumps you made out of us, I'll beat your damn ears in, you and your eerie gods." Portion of telepathic report of number 67843 on asteroid J864A to number 5463 on Terra. As planned, I tested credulity of terrestrial minds by telling them the true story of what happened on Ganymede. Found them capable of acceptance thereof. This proves that our idea of embedding ourselves within the flesh of these terrestrial creatures was an excellent one, oh my goodness, and is essential to the success of our plan. True, this is less simple than our method on Ganymede, but we must continue to perform the operation upon each terrestrial being as we take him over. Bracelets or other appendages would arouse suspicion. There is no necessity in wasting a month here. I shall now take command of the ship and return. We will report no ore. We will report no ore present here. The four of us who will animate the four terrestrials now aboard this ship will report to you on Terra. That's a very old-fashioned science fiction story. After the other two, that one is very, very plain. Although I'm kind of not surprised by Frederick Brown writing a story like that. If you've read things like Arena, it is very him. So we are going to stop here because I am completely worn out by these stories. Oh my goodness. So yes, I am going to be gone for quite a while, 2 weeks or so. Well, a little bit less than 2 weeks. But I have not forgotten you, my dear scholars. So instead of streaming on Twitch, of course, there will be 2 special streams on my YouTube channel. If you want to find my YouTube channel, it is at Matsu Quinox on YouTube. Just search for that and you'll find it. Um, on that Tuesday, there will be a short from the study, a new one, a telling of a tale from one of Andrew Lane's collection of stories. And then on that Thursday will be a completely pre-recorded gaming stream. It is a Minecraft stream, which is guest starring Cool Skeleton, and I still thank Cool Skeleton for all the help he did on helping me with that stream. So keep your eye out on those YouTube streams. I'm always happy to see comments from my dear scholars on my YouTube videos. It helps me to know what you think of the content. So please do. Um, so before we go, let's see who we can raid tonight. Let us see who is available. Um, we haven't rated looks like Neverline Productions is doing Sea of Thieves. Let's give them a little raid. So then, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we see each other again in the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye bye.